All right, today, October 14th, 2019, we had the House Oversight and Reform Committee held a hearing on how some states are restricting reproductive rights and reproductive health care services, which really is just code for the right to kill the baby, under the guise of we love women and we care about them. But here's just some snippets. It was 3 hours, 13 minutes long. Here's just a few snippets from it.
About a viable fetus, if the law didn't prevent it, would you consider it a limitation morally for you to abort a viable fetus?
So I think you're forgetting that there are a number of reasons that go into patient's choice.
I thought at your clinic, does it matter what the reason is for the abortion?
At my clinic, I trust that women have a valid reason. Every reason that they have is valid.
Okay, so given that you think that every reason is valid, would you abort a viable fetus if there was not a law preventing it?
Again, given that the reality for people choosing abortion is that there are many reasons, there isn't a single thing that defines somebody's choice. It is a reflection of their...
You seem to have a hard time saying this. This tells me you have a heart, or at least you know that people watching this have a heart, and they would be concerned if you would just admit, which you won't admit here, that you would abort a viable fetus for any reason if the law did not prevent it.
Mr. Massey, abortion is moral. It is important. It is health care. And I support
she
people
just said abortion is moral. Like it's a fact. Climate change is real. Vaccines are safe and effective. Oh, there's two buzzwords they're using now. Abortion care. Health care is abortion care. And draconian. Tied into like any infringement on the right to kill the baby is draconian.
The experts in their own lives in making decisions for themselves.
It gives me some hope that you here understand that people do not support you when you say, or if you would say that you would abort a viable fetus for any reason. But given what you told us in your opening statement, and knowing what you've said, we know that you would, but it does give me hope that you still know in your heart that's wrong. Mrs. Stuck.
I'm not sure. Can I respond to that really?
It's not funny.
Murdering, but there's a lot of kids being murdered every day.
And why can't
we don't do anything
both?
about that. I'm reclaiming my time.
Oh, she was awesome. The only person in the panel telling the truth.
In the wake of many draconian measures, my own state of Illinois recently signed into law a bill to protect abortion access for our residents. The Illinois Reproductive Health Act ensures coverage for abortion care and updates clinic regulations to lift that burden from abortion providers. Ms. Goss-Graves, how does eliminating coverage bans improve access to abortion care for women who are working to make ends meet?
It'll mean that the right to abortion, which has been legal for almost 50 years, will actually be a right that's accessible for women. For women, no matter their income. Whether or not that right is accessible to you should not be depending on your financial means. That's not what the court said.
Because the other thing we never talk about is, wealthier women who tend not to be women of color, they've been having abortions for a long time, whether they're in red states or blue states or however they vote or whatever their political interests are. And how will rolling back targeted regulations of abortion providers improve access?
Here's what we know. These targeted regulations of abortion providers are designed really to shut down clinics. They're designed to shame patients. They're designed to confuse people and disrupt the doctor-patient relationship. All of that makes abortion less accessible. And all of that, I have to say, the rhetoric that is surrounding it on top of the sorts of regulations and restrictions have made all of this so difficult for people who are just trying to live their lives and get the health care that they need.
Born alive.
And I know from a lot of college students that they're not going to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion, they're going for health. That is their
That's such
place of choice to
bullshit.
get health care, not
There's no
for
health care.
abortions.
There's contraception,
Planned Parenthood
STD
is very proud
testing,
to be able to provide
and abortion.
services to people who are financially insecure and to do
Wow.
that in a way that serves
right.
their needs. And
The humanity of the baby, the viability.
Wait a minute.
Lot of medical advances, certainly over the last several decades.
Let me make this
Can
quick.
you tell us
Make it
about
work if I
some
talk.
specific scientific evidence supporting the personhood, the humanity of the
Personhood.
baby, the viability?
Well, embryology tells us, thank you for your question. First of all, embryology tells us that the child from the moment of conception has a separate DNA. And so when we hear these euphemisms
key.
thrown around, like my body, my choice, immediately obscuring the life of the, it shows me that the pro-abortion argument doesn't deal with fact, it deals with feeling, which is exactly why we've had time getting any kind of clear answer from any of the panelists of what abortion actually is. What does it do? Because talking about tearing a child apart limb by limb with forceps just isn't a very good PR strategy for Planned Parenthood or the abortion industry. All I'm trying to do is to remind us when we're having this conversation that there are two people. There are two people. And I don't believe that we
This
have
is
to
the
pit
damning
a mother against her child in
speech.
order for a woman to be successful. We talked about, legislative solutions and showing compassion for children after they're born. I absolutely believe in that. Every pro-life pregnancy center that I've ever been a part of, that I've ever donated to, they don't just counsel women. They also offering parenting classes. They are also offering help from abusive situations. They are offering programs for these young women to be able to get affordable baby clothes and baby products and things like that. And so every pro-life organization I know cares about children in the womb after they're born and the mother who is pregnant with these children. That is what I am trying to argue, that let's not ignore the scientific reality that a baby is a baby and therefore, in my opinion, is deserving of the right to life.
And the way this is even going beyond abortion.
Women's Health, which was 3 years ago. And the case that's going to be before the court this term, the June Medical
But a
Service.
lot has changed. Science has developed a whole lot. Back in the 70s, it was rare for an ultrasound, for a woman to have an ultrasound, isn't it correct? Now we know a whole lot. We know that a baby can be viable at 20 weeks. We know that a baby feels pain.
This is
I ask
good.
unanimous consent to submit this peer review, a scientific article on fetal pain.
Fetal pain. They don't want to hear that. Babies actually feel their nerves and that undeveloped, but at a certain point they feel pain at a higher rate. And they get dismembered alive when they're aborted or burned alive.
That a baby feels during abortion. There's a lot that's happened since this is, and certainly I think the scientific advances merits us relooking at this.
The Supreme Court did 3 years ago in the Whole Women's Health decision. It considered and
Dr.
reaffirmed.
Nichols, you mentioned a number of health inspections at your abortion clinic when you just took over. Were you aware of the history of health violations at your clinic before you took over?
So our clinic has been subject to repeated inspections every year, which we have passed with a
She starts out everything with so. Don't trust people who start out their answer with so.
single inspection every single year up until this year, when clearly it was no longer about ensuring the safety of patients, and it became about a quest to end abortion access.
Okay, well, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit to the record. This is only 7 states of health code violations at abortion clinics from a,
No objection, we accept this entry, thank you. And your time has
unfortunately,
expired.
time's up.
Okay. I now recognize Congresswoman Presley for her questioning. She has been a tireless.
There's our wordsmithing
Title
now.
10 that says you have to physically and financially separate your abortion services from the rest of your contraceptive care in order to receive a rule. Well, it's actually not a gag rule that Trump administration go for.
Protect babies who are born alive after an abortion attempt. Many argue that the Born Alive Act is unnecessary because doing so violates existing criminal law. Do you believe federal law should be clarified to ensure babies born alive after a failed abortion should receive critical medical care?
Yes, it needs to be clarified. So this new law the Democrats have tried so hard to blockade simply criminalizes the neglect of an abortion provider to attend to the medical needs of a child who survives an abortion, further recognizes this child's personhood, and says this is the medical treatment that is required for a child outside the womb. We're not even talking inside the womb anymore. And unfortunately, Democrats cannot even get on board with that. There are not any undue burdens, undue regulations. This is not preventing abortion providers from even giving abortions. It's simply saying if a child survives an abortion, attend to that child. It should be really simple. If you really are pro-choice and you're really not pro-abortion, as I've heard many times during this hearing, that should be a no-brainer.
I understand a baby can survive as early as 23 weeks old. Can you elaborate on how
21.
age of viability has changed in the recent years and what's made that possible?
Well, as technology and medicine advances, thankfully, hospitals are able to give incredible perinatal care so that a child as young as 21 weeks actually has been known to survive outside of the womb. I mean, that's pretty early in the second trimester. That's only halfway through the pregnancy. At 24 weeks, that is generally accepted as the age of viability. What that means is that that child has a really good chance, if she were to be born prematurely, to live outside the womb, to grow. She would spend some time in NICU, but she would grow up, if everything went well and she was healthy, into a normal functioning child. You wouldn't even be able to look back and tell that the child was premature. So when we're talking about these children as if they're not children, as if they're not babies, we're talking about mere location. I mean, on the one hand, we talk about them as if they are just these parasites to be discarded as these remains of pregnancy, I think is what I heard the doctor say earlier. And then a second later, when they're outside of the womb, they're all of a sudden babies. Although, unfortunately, as you pointed out and other congresspeople have pointed out, even then, they don't seem to be respected by the pro-abortion side.
Great
I yield
point.
back.
Wow.
Thank you. I understand that the witness, Mrs. Stuckey, has
here
a
comes
flight
Debbie
she has to
Wasserman
catch.
Schultz.
So I will
She's got it
dismiss
straight
her,
up.
noting that there may be
Do
other
damage
additional
control.
questions that I request that she answer them in writing. And thank you for your testimony, and I hope you don't miss your flight.
Me too.
So the next speaker will be Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida. Congresswoman Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have a question of you, and in fairness, I'd like Ms. Stuckey to hear my question, because
What a
I
wicked
wouldn't want
woman.
I wouldn't want there to be any assumption that I was saying it as she was no longer in the room. I just want to clarify that Ms. Stuckey is here expressing her own opinion exclusively and has no scientific or particular expertise in this subject matter whatsoever. Is that accurate? No, I wanted to ask you,
Whatsoever.
from what you're now, her own opinion exclusively and has no scientific or particular expertise in this subject matter whatsoever. Is that accurate? No, I wanted to ask you, from what your knowledge of her experience is in the description of the witness's experience.
That's my understanding.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that particular fact.
But I think the witness should answer in all fairness, as she's here.
I think it says something when I, the one without the scientific or medical background, am the only one to give you specifics on what an abortion procedure actually is.
Reclaiming my time, Ms. Stuckey. My question was not of you.
Without saying that there are many things we've heard that should make us shudder. But I believe that what Mr. Keller said leads us into what I want to say next. But comparing killing a baby to removing wisdom teeth is absolutely beyond the pale.
That's right.
And when we have people, as Mr. Keller asked the question, where is this decision to kill innocent life going to take us in this country? To say it's terminating a pregnancy, and as Ms. Stuckey said, never ever facing up to what you're really doing
Yep.
is scary to me.
That's right.
And I want to say that Ms. Lee said that Republicans characterize women who've had an abortion as evil. I've never heard a Republican say that. We grieve, and I said that at the beginning, we grieve for the women who find themselves making that decision. I cannot imagine that it's ever easy. I hope it's never easy for any woman to decide to kill her unborn child. I hope and pray that's not easy. And I would never characterize a woman who's faced with that decision and makes that decision as evil. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right.
I thank the gentleman. She yields back.
All right. This was like interesting. New buzzwords, new ways to convince the American public that the sacrifice of the baby is a good thing, and it's for women. Yeah.